Linda, very nice. And I'm thinking one time, how in the
Language.
does she put up with this guy all these years? But now you look at the money she has, well, it may have been worth it. So what else did they say? Let's get to the dirt nitty gritty here.
Well, one of the big kind of topics of discussion was the steroid trial in the early 90s in the first couple of episodes. Kind of where were you at that time? And like, this was like around 92, 93, those steroids trials. And how did kind of like your perspective being a wrestler in the business at that time, how did like people outside of WWF were viewing like the steroids trial and how that could have like really changed the trajectory of the business after the big boom of the 80s and businesses kind of on the decline around the early 90s? How did the rest of the industry kind of view that?
Most of them were out of business by that time. In the late 80s, early 90s, most of them had just closed up shop. We can't do it. We can't compete. And so you had vast areas out there not being serviced by a promoter with live shows or TVs but I think it hurt the business. Because in the early 80s, if you didn't work for two companies, WCW and WWF, you didn't work, period. So, and if you didn't have any other way to make a living, tough shit. You better go find something or go make a bunch of independents. And this was before the independent surge took over. Now you can kind of make a few bucks off the independents now, but not then, because the independents then were languishing in what was left. And if any of those guys had been any good, they'd have been with WWF or WCW. But nobody was any good. So, and it paid no money. They didn't draw any money. What you had a bunch of the blind leading the blind, and they'd try to promote a wrestling show in a town, and it would just bomb. So there was no money for anybody really except the top stars.
You think you know all the wrestling stories? There's more you haven't heard yet. Join us on Backstage Pass.
So going more into kind of the later episodes, because I think the back half of the Mr. McMahon documentary is really where things started getting like a little bit more interesting when you go into like the Attitude Era. And then episode 5 was Family Business, talking about the different relationship that Vince had with his wife Linda as well as his kids. You brought up the whole Shane McMahon and Vince McMahon dispute that was described by Paul Heyman. There's also kind of a lot of information as far as like Vince and Stephanie's relationship and how Stephanie as a businesswoman kind of modeled herself after Vince and had that kind of ruthless aggression, as Vince always says, and more people describing like Tony Atlas describing Shane as a lot nicer. So what was your perspective, your viewpoint of the relationship that Vince had with Stephanie and Shane, his kids, and how did you feel as far as like dealing with those individuals by themselves without Vince?
Well, me and Vince together, it was okay. He was civil. He was okay. And I've said this before, Vince, when I dealt with him on a one-on-one, it was a strange sensation being next to him because I felt a funny vibe coming off him. And it was an uneasy vibe, and I'm thinking, I didn't know what I was feeling. Now, later on, when I heard all these things that he was doing or he had done or he's going to do or he will do, that was probably what I was feeling. Now, Shane, on the other hand, very, very nice guy. I think you're able to sit down with Shane and have a normal conversation and without just going completely bonkers like Vince would do sometimes. And Stephanie, she was a nice lady. But the nicest one I found out of all of them was, what's the wife's name?
Linda.
It was Linda. Very nice. And I'm thinking one time, how in the
language
does she put up with this guy all these years? But now you look at the money she has, well, it may have been worth it, but I don't know. I know their story, and I hope she loved him, because I don't think it would have been easy to live with Vince McMahon as your husband.
So you kind of brought up kind of having that uneasy feeling with Vince, and a lot of his interview kind of blurbs and quotes have been kind of dissected since this documentary came out. One in particular in the earlier episodes is when he's talking about former referee Rita Chatterton and her allegations against him that he sexually assaulted her. And basically his line that really caught me, this was like the first line of the whole interview with Vince, that was just like, wait, why would you say that? If I'm your lawyer, I'm trying to get double the pay, because he said as far as Rita Chatterton's allegations, that he said that the relationship that he had with Rita Chatterton was consensual. And even if it wasn't consensual, it is outside the statute of limitations. So I was like, why would you even say that extra? You just, if you think it was consensual, just say that. Don't even mention statute of limitations. Once you mention statute of limitations, you're kind of giving yourself away to me.
Yeah, you just convicted yourself. I don't care what she says. It was consensual, and besides that, my lawyers told me it's outside the statute of limitation. Tell me you're guilty without telling me you're guilty. So, and when I read that story, I said, Vince is a guilty
language.
He's just, when you hear all these stories, people hear stories about Vince and they're thinking, how in the hell did he operate? Well, he operated in a vacuum to where nobody could challenge him. He could do what he wanted to do. He owned the building, he owned the people, he owned the money, he owned the air, he owned everything. So when he got in a situation like this, hey, you either do it Vince's way or you hit the sidewalk and you keep walking. So, and Vince knew that. And I'm watching it, he said he never played fair. We may have talked about this before, but yeah, he didn't play fair, ever. So, and I've seen guys, they would say one thing wrong on an interview, and he would fire them sitting in the chair at the go position, and he would tell Mark Chevelle or whoever. Shapiro, he said, fire him when he comes back. Tell him to get his bag, get out of here, don't come back. Just like that. Because he didn't like his interview. God damn. That's, if you're going to have a boss that way, and that's going to set him off, I don't know. You know, a lot of people think, and I want everybody out there who has had a desire to work for the WWE, believe me, it's not the bed of roses everybody thought it was. It was sometimes very, very difficult to work there. And when the war was going on with WCW and nobody was making any money, and it was terrible. It was brutal. It really was. So, and then you go on the road and you'd be gone. I went one time. I don't know if this was WCW or WWF. 64 straight days on the road. 64. Without a day off. Finally, I told them, I said, guys, don't book me on those days because I'm not going to be there. They said, well, why? I said, well, goddamn. I mean, if we took this to a court of law, I'm working like 100 hours a week, and I wouldn't get paid by the hours. I was getting paid by the events. So they ripped a lot of guys new bodies. We're all limping around now. We got damn dementia in our heads, and I mean, but we went through it. Oh, but we were wrestlers. That's what we wanted to be. But hey, it's what I want to do. So I don't regret doing it, but I wish I had approached it from a different perspective.